In the 1960s, the United States was experiencing a time of change. Men had crew cuts or long hair, and women were wearing go-go boots. Popular early 60s dances included the twist, and John F. Kennedy introduced the Peace Corps. It was a great time of change as the nation was being introduced to new styles and ideas, but things turned for the worse when John F. Kennedy was shot and assassinated, and Lyndon B. Johnson became president. The Vietnam War was escalating as more troops were being sent, and the violence at home also spiraled. Although there were many innovations, there also remained an eternal conflict. Protesters were battling the government. Riots were breaking out from Washington to New York. Hippies were protesting against violent methods the U.S. government was using in the Vietnam War that was occurring across the sea. They protested on heavy issues, from war to racial segregation. Segregation especially was making the U.S. a tense and hostile place. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 had ended legal discrimination and ordered for it to stop in public areas, school, and in the workplace. However, some whites still openly discriminated against blacks in restaurants and other public places. One well-known example of defiance to the segregation was in the year 1955, when a defiant African-American woman by the name of Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white man on a bus. Blacks were to sit in the back of the bus and give up seats to white people, even though the Civil Rights Act had outlawed this type of segregation. Her arrest was a catalyst to the Montgomery bus boycott that helped increase awareness to the civil rights movement that had begun.
But we had to achieve equal rights as any human being.
The civil rights movement was aimed at establishing equality and civil rights for all Americans irrespective of race. It consisted of a series of boycotts, marches, and social and political activism. One of the most important figures in the civil rights movement was Martin Luther King Jr. He helped organize the Montgomery bus boycott that was meant to protest the racial segregation on the Montgomery public transit system. He also delivered his I Have a Dream speech during the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom.
Captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination.
He was also elected president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or the SCLC. The SCLC was founded in 1957. It was an organization that strived for civil rights and the end of segregation through nonviolent methods. The SCLC was mainly in the South, but targeted Chicago as one of their summer projects. As a result of this, the Coordinating Council of Community Organizations, CCCO, was founded in Chicago in the early 1960s. It was a civil rights organization aimed at reforming the public school system. Al Raby, who was the leader of the organization, worked with King during the open housing movement in Chicago. Al Raby had before founded Teachers for Quality Education, a group formed to fight the segregation in the public schools. African Americans have suffered from a discriminatory housing market since the beginning. They resisted with several housing marches. White property owners use restrictive covenants. These can limit a variety of adjustments or circumstances of sale or rental. Racially restrictive covenants are when surrounding neighbors agree and encourage to prohibit certain groups of people, in this case African Americans, to buy or occupy a home in their area. These conditions were really intolerable, and people cried out to Chicago for affordable housing. Martin Luther King Jr. with the SCLC and Al Raby with the CCCO sought to lessen this discrimination with rallies, marches, and protests, non-violently of course. Activists and reformers targeted Chicago's dual housing market and staged open housing marches in all-white city neighborhoods and suburbs. In one incident, 3 young men were arrested for using weapons in a march by Mayor Daley's home, causing city leaders to re-examine the coalition of conscience that King had brought upon Chicago. Other government leaders thought King's actions were cause of violence and should be limited and controlled. In addition to the general problems, even several black aldermen were neutral towards the movement. The reason for which they wanted no part in it was that under Chicago's current laws, they were prospering. Radically altering those laws might change it. The person who imposed the biggest obstacle was the mayor, Mayor Richard J. Daley. He didn't like King or other outside reformers. He was sure they would bring trouble to his city. He believed civil rights activists were very troublesome and disrespectful towards his path to making Chicago a better place. This negative criticism did not stop King from speaking out. His most famous rally was the Soldier Field Rally held on July 10, 1966. It focused on housing discrimination against African Americans and was used to help the campaign of open housing. At the Soldier Field event, about 100,000 were expected to come, but only about 60,000 actually came. He gave a speech in which he outlined the goals of the movement. The goals were organized into groups in which they were directed to. After leading a march from Soldiers Field to City Hall, he later posted these demands at City Hall's door. One of them, under Banks and Savings Institution, states, public statements of a non-discriminatory mortgage policy so that loans would be available to any qualified borrower without regard to the racial composition of the area. In the Chicago Housing Authority section, it states, 1. Program to rehabilitate present public housing, including such items as locked lobbies, restrooms and recreation areas, increased police protection, and child care centers. Mayor Daley wanted to end all of the chaos, so by mid-August, he and movement activists negotiated and came to an agreement. The Summit Agreement meetings were first initialized on August 16, 1966. The first meeting was 7.5 hours long. Civil rights leaders, real estate leaders, and business, political, and religious elite were present. The meetings and discussions went on for 10 days, and on August 26, 1966, a Summit Agreement was reached for the text agreement. One of the demands states that it is hereby declared the policy of the City of Chicago to assure full and equal opportunity to all residents of the city to obtain fair and adequate housing for themselves and their families in the City of Chicago without discrimination against them because of their race, color, religion, national origin, or ancestry. King said it was a very important negotiation, but however, it was only the first step in a 1,000-mile journey.